Hey, and welcome to the Winning Daily Show for October the 23rd. Big Saturday, lots of action. We got NBA mixed with boxing, mixed with soccer, mixed with college football. Of course, we got an action-packed and loaded show today. We're going to make a couple changes in our straight bets from our Thursday show with the Dynamite David. As we looked further and further, we moved some straight bets in. We moved some straight bets into some parlays, and then we just took away some overall picks overall in that. We'll get to those, but first let's start out in soccer. Let's start out in Germany. We did a 3-team parlay here. We put RB Leipzig, who is facing Greuther Fürth. Greuther Fürth just made it into the Bundesliga, have had a really hard time so far, winless so far in the Bundesliga, sitting right back in last place. Probably will go back down in the second tier of Germany. Yes, RB Leipzig has struggled, but they've started to play a little bit better overall in the Bundesliga. Had that good win versus Hertha Berlin, 6-0. Then came back, won versus Bachheim, 3-0, and tied Freiburg. Yes, that was on the road, but Freiburg, played pretty well this year. So 2 wins and a draw so far in the Bundesliga. Yes, they've really struggled in the Champions League. Losses to Paris Saint-Germain, really tough loss to Club Brugge, but I think they're starting to find their form here in the Bundesliga. So we have RB Leipzig, we have Bayern Munich, who should be able to cruise very easily today at home versus Hoffenheim. Hoffenheim not been great of late, and I just Bayern Munich, always on full form, very rarely loses at home. I think that's happened once. And to Iron Frankfurt, I don't think that's going to happen probably the rest of the season. Hoffenheim, meanwhile, on the road, went to Stuttgart, lost 3-1, went to Blyfield in a 0-0 one. So they're a team that struggles on the road. So Bayern Munich won. You should always just take Bayern Munich because they always win in the Bundesliga. And 2, Hoffenheim, while a solid team, struggles on the road, should be able to win. So we have those 2. And then our third team in the parlay, Hertha Berlin. So this sort of shifts this parlay a little bit. We got 2 easy winners. Bump up Hertha Berlin, who's at about 160 on the 3-way here. We bump this up, and we get a really good price on these 3. Really like Hertha Berlin here. It goes to about 5-1. So you take 2 really long shots and slide Hertha Berlin in there at plus 170. You take that, take it to a normal size parlay at about 5-1. And if Hertha Berlin can pull this off, and I really like Hertha Berlin here versus Mönchengladbach. Hertha has been a little bit hot and cold, but had a great win last week over Eintracht Frankfurt, who were just coming off that win to Bayern Munich. They go home. I think they'll be really ready to play at home here. They had a 2-1 win over the aforementioned Greuther Fürth, a 3-1 win over Bachheim. They have struggled a little bit more at home than on the road, which is really a little bit confounding for a Berlin team. Both Union Berlin really have been dominant home teams, but I look for him to get back on track here. Gladbach, really been solid of late. Had a nice win at Wolfsburg, who's really struggled. Had that win at home versus Dortmund, but then they came back home, 1-1 to Stuttgart. So I think they're due. Maybe they're finding a little bit loss of form. They went to Augsburg a couple weeks ago, lost that one 1-0, so I look for Hertha Berlin to take this. I think there's good value if you make this 3-way parlay. Now, let's shift to the Premier League. We got a couple bets in the Premier League today. Interesting matchups, not a ton of, really exciting matchups, but a couple good ones. Southampton versus Burnley. I don't know if this will be an entertaining game, but Southampton at minus 105 at home, got off the shy, got their first win. They had been playing pretty good, football of late, but got their first win last week. I look for that to continue. Granted, Burnley has owned them over the past, whether they sit back, and then Southampton struggles when a team comes to counter and offset pieces. That's Burnley's game, but I think Southampton at home, coming off that first win, will be able to get this, especially as Burnley has struggled this year. So minus 105 on the three-way, I really, really like. Then Everton, minus 145 on the three-way. Watford has been just woeful, even after the coaching change. They have not been good. A terrible showing last week. Everton, not a great showing last week. Look for them, and to build on that and get this win. I think they will be ready to win this game, focused in. They have a couple of their guys back. I think that will help them out. They've been a little shorthanded, which explains last week's clip, but I think they'll be better this week, especially versus a poor Watford side. At home in Liverpool, I think Everton's the play here, minus 145. And then lastly, we're going to go with Newcastle. Changing of a coach. We knew that was coming. Steve Bruce has long been, on the chopping block. New ownership. The Saudis take over there. Lots of money coming in. We knew Steve Bruce was going to be. They let him coach his 1,000th game. We took against them. We got that nice win last week versus Tottenham. Now, this week, we're going to take Newcastle. We're going to cover it a little bit because Crystal Palace really, really have played well. Probably deserve more than the draws that they've been getting. But maybe they have a light showing here. Maybe Newcastle gets, a little bit of a coach's bump here. So Newcastle plus 165, but we're going to protect ourselves. We aren't taking it on the three-way. We're taking Newcastle 165, draw, no bet. We're reducing our odds a little bit, but we're protecting ourselves. If Crystal Palace draws once again, if Newcastle doesn't show up here. But I really like that one. Now, let's switch out to Italy and let's go to Sassuolo versus Venezia. Sassuolo, really been disappointing so far this year. I thought they'd be off to a better start. They have not been off to a better start. It's been really, really disappointing. But they've started to look better of late, I think. The results haven't quite been there, but I think they've looked better. They had that 2-2 draw versus Genoa. They had the 2-1 loss to Inter Milan where they got up on them. And they had that 1-0 win versus Southampton. Have they been struggling? Yes, but they're starting to score goals, which is where you want Sassuolo to be. They play a very open style, and I think maybe they're coming around. So at home versus Venezia, who's a newly promoted side. They've played solid. They aren't sitting in regulation territory, so they've been okay. They had a really, really impressive win over Fiorentina just last week. Do they bounce back? They had draws versus Cagliari. They had draws versus Torino, so they've been in good form. But I think Sassuolo is at the advantage here, especially if you take them here. Sassuolo to win, both teams to score. So you take Sassuolo to win, both teams to score. That goes to plus 190. So that's where I think the value is. I don't think the value is there on the three-way, but I think these two teams have shown up penchant for poor defensive play, open offensive play. So let's go Sassuolo plus 190 to win, both teams to score. Out to La Liga. The big one is tomorrow. We got Barcelona, Real Madrid. We'll definitely be on Winning Daily tomorrow for the Barcelona, Real Madrid matchup. But first, let's get a couple of sort of lower tier teams. We're going to take Elche, minus 135 versus Espanola. Elche hasn't been playing well, but they're a much, much better team at home. Espanola was playing poorly. And then they got a really, really impressive win the other day. They're coming off the win over Cadiz. They're coming off the win over Real Madrid. That was the big one. At home, Real Madrid comes there, wins 2-1. They didn't rest on their laurels, 2-0. So, yes, Espanola's playing well after a really slow start. Elche, not so great, but I will say they've been good at home. Elche 1-1 draw to Levante at home, 1-0 win over Celta Vigo, who's been a little bit hot and cold, but on the road they've struggled. So I like Elche here, minus 145 at home. They're a good home team, tough place to go. Espanola, always a good home team, not a good road team. So that's why we're playing that, despite what it's looked like of late, as Espanola's been playing really, really well. Elche, not so much, but we still like Elche at home here at minus 135 on the three-way. Then lastly, Atletico Bilbao plus 150. I really, really like this. On the three-way here, Villarreal did have a nice win in Champions League versus Young Boys, but they played midweek. They've struggled in La Liga. They just come off a loss to Osasuna at home. They had the 2-1 loss to Manchester United, which they played well. They played well in that Real Madrid game, 0-0. They have not gotten results, even though they've played well. Now going to Bilbao, which everybody knows is a really, really difficult place to play. After playing midweek, they aren't that kind of team that is deep enough to play midweek, then play a Saturday game. Schedule's not in their favor, so I think the value's there at plus 155. Bilbao at home has been dominant, as always, coming off a 1-0 win over Alves at home. Also have the 2-0 win over Mallorca at home. So I think Atletico Bilbao plus 150 on the three-way. Really, really, really good value. All right, light boxing today. But Shakur Stevenson, Jamal Herring. You can't really take it because Shakur Stevenson, such a heavy favorite, been so good. But by KO, plus 160. Yes, Shakur Stevenson is more a technician, doesn't get a ton of KOs, certainly has not gotten a ton of KOs as he stepped up in competition of late. But Jamal Herring, I think, is there to be knocked out. I think Shakur Stevenson will, pound on him a little bit. I wonder if Jamal Herring is getting pounded on late, this thing doesn't lead to a stoppage. He has been knocked out once before, so I like Shakur Stevenson getting the plus 160 for the KO here on the boxing. Let's go to the NBA. Tough night in the NBA last night. Couldn't find a winner. Those home dogs weren't helping us at all. But we got a lot of teams on back-to-backs tonight, so we're going to take advantage of that. Or we're going to try to take advantage of that because the lines were pretty much lopsided. Didn't like a lot of the spreads. But I did like two straight bets here. Memphis Grizzlies plus 3.5 versus the LA Clippers. Really like that as the Clippers just played in Golden State on Thursday night. Flying cross country into Memphis, playing Memphis 3.5 at home. I think this is a really, really tough game for the Clippers. A lot of good players on the Grizzlies. Got off to a good start beating the Cavs the other night. Next up, Portland Trailblazers, minus 2.5 at home versus the Phoenix Suns. Phoenix Suns played last night. Real big win over the Lakers. Now, can they go from LA all the way up to Portland? Really tough trip overnight and get that energy off the season just kicking off. Who knows who's playing? Really like Portland minus the 2.5. Those are our two straight bets. Now we're going to take a crazy parlay here. We're pretty much going to go against every team that's on a back-to-back, but we're going to do it money line style, except for one where we're going to take Detroit on the spread. So let's start off. The Hawks versus Cleveland. We're taking the Hawks on the money line in that one. Then we got the Heat versus the Indiana Pacers. We're taking the Heat on the money line in that one. Mavericks over Toronto. Timberwolves over New Orleans. Bucks over San Antonio. And then, lastly, Detroit plus the 9 for Chicago. I really like this. Yes, they just played 2 days ago. Always wonderful to schedule the two teams sandwiched in between each other. Detroit opens, Chicago. But plus the 9, I think that's good value. So you have a 6-team parlay here playing 10-1. All you have to do is win the money line. Will somebody mess it up? Yes, probably so, but I think there's value there. Basically, you're getting Detroit plus 9 and a whole lot of teams that have had off days versus a whole lot of teams who are on their first back-to-back. And not only that, all those teams that are in those matchups are the better team that they're playing against. So really like that. Really like the 10-1. Decent value there. It's the NBA, though. It'll probably get messed up by someone. But that's what we got. Now let's move to some college football. Big college football. Let's start out with parlays. We got 4 3-team parlays here. We're going to start out. I said I was going to avoid the MAC for the rest of my life. I cannot quit the MAC. The MAC is always fun, despite its craziness and weirdness this season. But let's start out with our first 3-team parlay. We're going to ride Eastern Michigan, minus 3.5 versus Bowling Green. Yes. Have they been great? Yes. Will they probably let us down? Probably so, going to Bowling Green. But Bowling Green is really bad despite the win over Minnesota. Let's see if Eastern Michigan can keep this going at the top of the MAC right now. Can they continue to be at the top of the MAC? They just need to beat Bowling Green by 3.5. Next up, we had Syracuse, remember, in our Football Time podcast with Dynamite David as a straight bet. I decided to go against that. We're moving Syracuse into parlay territory. So Eastern Michigan minus 3.5, Syracuse plus 3.5 versus Virginia Tech. And lastly, back to the MAC. Western Michigan minus 1.5. They opened up the floodgates versus Kent State last week. We were really off on that one. Now they go to Toledo. Toledo has really, really struggled. Now they're without their quarterback. Western Michigan minus 1.5. Really like the value there. I think Western Michigan's probably about to make themselves a dominant team here in the MAC as they were in the preseason, despite getting off to a little bit of a tricky start during MAC season. So Eastern Michigan minus 3.5 over Bowling Green, Syracuse plus 3.5 over Virginia Tech, Western Michigan minus 1.5 versus Toledo. All right. First 3-team parlay. Let's go to the second 3-team parlay. We're going to start with Illinois plus the 23. I think Penn State will put this game away, but they aren't going to try to run it up. Quarterback's hurt. We don't know how much he's going to play or if he's even going to play. And if they go to that backup, that game plan is going to be scaled way, way back. I think 23 is too much on an Illinois team who's shown a propensity to keep games in the low-scoring territory. So 23 is good value there. Speaking of that, Northwestern plus 23.5 versus Michigan here. I thought 2 weeks ago Northwestern might have found their rhythm. They did not. They got rolled by Nebraska. But then last week, they seem to have found their rhythm. 23.5. I think this game is closer than people think, like the value at 23.5. Lastly, we're going to take the wild card in Maryland. Do we get good Maryland? Do we get mad Maryland? I'm hoping we get good Maryland. Maryland plus the 4.5 versus Minnesota. So that's our second 3-team parlay. Illinois plus 23, Northwestern plus 23.5, Maryland plus 4.5. Let's shift gears. I had Louisville on my straight bets on the Football Time show on Thursday, shifted them out of the straight bets into the parlays. -6 versus Boston College. Same thing with Notre Dame, out of the straight bets into the parlay, Notre Dame -6.5. And lastly, we're going to throw TCU -4.5 versus West Virginia there. TCU getting a couple guys back who have been hurt. West Virginia really has struggled on the road, really will struggle on the road going all the way to TCU, Dallas-Fort Worth there. I think TCU -4.5, good value. So Louisville -6, Notre Dame -6.5, TCU -4.5 in our third 3-team parlay. And lastly, our fourth 3-team parlay. Oklahoma State +7 versus Iowa State. Really like the value here in Oklahoma State. Undefeated. Iowa State has not played really, really good football so far this year. We'll see if they can get off the schneid. But I'm taking value over who I've seen play well and who I haven't seen well. +7 for Oklahoma State. UCLA -1 over Oregon here. And then lastly, Ohio State -21 over Indiana. Ohio State has gone on a blitzkrieg coming off a bye. Indiana's looked worse and worse each and every week. Now they're on a backup quarterback. And for some reason, they're still throwing 50 times a game. If you watch that game last week, had 1 billion yards, but also had 1 billion turnovers. That equates to being blown out by Ohio State. So +7 for Oklahoma State versus Iowa State. UCLA -1 versus Oregon. Ohio State -21 versus Indiana. So those are our 4 3-team parlays. We've hit a parlay every week, but 1 week so far in the college football season. Let's see if we can keep that streak going this week. Next up, last week we didn't have any upset special, didn't like any. This week we got a couple of upset specials in here. We're loaded with the upset specials this week. We're going to start out with Northwestern. 13-1. We got a really, really long shot on that one. Let's see if we can win some big money on that one. Do I think they'll win this game? No, probably not. But I think the value at 13-1 is there if this Northwestern team has sort of found themselves, found their defensive side, and then grunge up enough offensive points. But 13-1, solid value there. We're going to Maryland, +175 over Minnesota here. Minnesota's 1 game since the Bowling Green game. Maryland coming off a bye after those 2 demolitions versus Iowa and Ohio State. Can they get back on track? I think they can. I think their explosiveness on offense here presents a problem to Minnesota. If Minnesota gets behind, I think they'll struggle to get back in the game. Next up, East Carolina, 4-1 over Houston. East Carolina played pretty solid football so far. Since that opening start versus Appy State, getting better each and every week. They go to Houston. Houston, been really, really good of late. I think that means Houston's going to be really bad, because every time you start to trust Houston, it means Houston drops a bomb on you. So East Carolina plus 4-1 on this one. Next up, Oklahoma State. I mentioned it in my parlay. They're 6-0. They're the team that's played well so far this year. Iowa State has not played well so far this year. That Kansas State win was the best game they had. They beaten UNLV. They lost to Baylor. I think Oklahoma State's good value. 265 you're getting on the money line there. Take that one. Oklahoma State has also owned this series. Look at the head-to-head matchups. Oklahoma State always seems to beat Iowa State. There's one win under Matt Campbell versus Oklahoma State there. Next, we're going to LSU. 222. We don't have this in our parlays. We don't have this in our straight bets. Why? Because LSU is either going to roll and win this, or they're going to get killed. So we're just taking the value of the 222 on the upset special in case we get a good LSU team who's running the ball well again. And lastly, we mentioned it on the Thursday show. We like this UL Monroe team. Already had an upset as a 30-point underdog. Already had as an upset as a 25-point underdog. Can they get the upset over South Alabama as a 13-point dog? It's getting lower and lower each and every week as Monroe gets a little bit more respect. So we're going to ride it after being disappointed in not taking the UL Monroe as 33-point dog yesterday or last week over Liberty. We're going to try to get on it, get the 4-1. The 33-1 would have been nice last week. 4-1 UL Monroe as our upset special in our last grouping there. All right, so let's get to our straight bets. We've had some changes from Thursday's show. Let's start out with Army plus the 3.5 over Wake Forest. Just think this is a way, way too tricky game. Wake Forest in the middle of an undefeated season, in the middle of winning the ACC right now. Now they have to go to Army on a noon game. I think this is a difficult thing to do. Army getting 3.5, really like that half point off the key number of 3. So Army plus 3.5, if you can get that, I'd grab it. Next up, Purdue plus 3 versus Wisconsin. You know, I mentioned this during a Thursday show. Why is Wisconsin favored on the road versus Purdue? Purdue has had the better season. Wisconsin has been poor all season long. You take that value plus the 3. Next up, BYU staying in there minus the 4 versus Washington State. Just too much chaos going on at Washington State here. BYU is always organized and ready. Yes, they're coming off back-to-back losses to Boise State and Baylor, but I think they get back on track here versus Washington State. Next up, UCLA minus the 1 versus Oregon. I've thought about it all week. I started to lean Oregon early in the week. The more and more I look at it, I think this UCLA team is a play. UCLA at home, game day there in Pasadena, minus 1. Play UCLA. Next up, Nevada, plus 3.5 versus Fresno State. Still like this one. Stayed in it from our Thursday show. I just think Nevada's the better team here, getting 3.5 points, especially since Fresno State has not played well of late. Next up, Texas A&M minus 20 versus South Carolina. Really like this. Texas A&M should be able to roll here versus South Carolina. Easy money. Take the 20. Next up, Oregon State plus 3 versus Utah. I thought I would leave this one out because I love both teams, but I think the value's too much there for Oregon State. At home, Utah coming off 2 really, really tough games, including a road win. I just think going up to Corvallis is too much trouble there. Plus 3 for Oregon State on that one. Really like this team's offense. Think they get back on track after a tough loss 2 weeks ago versus Washington State, and then coming off a bye. I think they'll be ready for Utah. Next up, Clemson plus 3.5 versus Pittsburgh. I couldn't resist putting it in there. I think there's too much value in here. You can't trust Pitt. Minus 3.5 versus Clemson. Pitt doesn't win big games. We saw that. They started to get a little hype, played Western Michigan, got beat by Western Michigan going in there. Yes, Clemson doesn't have the offense that Western Michigan does, but Clemson has a defense that can beat up this Pitt team. I think if this Pitt team gets hit a little bit, they'll start to, cave. Look for Clemson to get going. Can they find their offense? I don't know, but I think it's there somewhere. Maybe it comes out today. Clemson plus 3.5, really good value. I'd also look at that money line. I didn't think it was quite high enough to put in our upset special at plus 145, but I do think it's there. Let's go Clemson. Plus 3.5 versus Pitt. Lastly, UL Monroe plus 13.5 versus South Alabama. We mentioned it. I don't think South Alabama is that much better than UL Monroe. UL Monroe has a better win so far this year. Take UL Monroe plus the 13.5. All right, lots of stuff to bet on. You got a full slate of stuff to bet on today. We'll be back tomorrow with our NFL action, with more NFL player props. No basketball props today. Too much to look through, too early in the day to sort through that, but we'll be back tomorrow with all that action. NFL player props, NBA player props. Be sure to like and subscribe. Catch all our shows, football time shows. Our Know It All show has been back with our NBA preview. You don't want to miss that. That's our show, and we're out.